Great. Okay. We ready to get started, Grant?
Let's do this.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us for our sixth consecutive wine school. I think that means that we're on day 421 of lockdown. I won't sleep anymore. I don't know what's happening anymore, but we're going to get through it. No, these have been great. We've been having a great time, obviously, going through, week by week and talking about different wines. And I think we say this every week, but always trying to improve them and make them more useful and more fun and more educational as we go. So always please give us suggestions. You can do so in the Q&A or the chat. You can email us. We have an email set up, just wine@theinfatuation.com. If there's something we don't get to today, or you just want to tell us that we need to stop doing something or start doing something, or just whatever we can do to make these better. We're learning just as much as we go, as you guys are, hopefully, when you're joining with us. So all the feedback is super, super helpful. And again, just for those of you that are new, please use the Q&A. We love to answer questions. Grant and I will pick out certain questions as we go. But our friend Cedric, who you can't see, but he is ever present, has joined us for yet another one of these, and we're super grateful. Cedric is the wine director at 11 Madison Park. He is an unbelievably talented wine professional with a ton of knowledge. So he'll be in there as well, and just answering questions if either we can't get to them or, if they're sort of like not directly related to what we're talking about. So all of that being said, if you don't know who I am, I'm Chris Stang. I'm the co-founder and CEO of The Infatuation. Grant Reynolds is the man in front of the arts. He is the one of the partners in Delicious Hospitality Group, and owns a great wine shop called Parcel, which I hope you guys have been ordering from. We try to send out emails, a week or so in advance of each class so you can order the wine that we're going to be talking about. We did do a 6-pack, which hopefully some of you guys got. We're about to do the next 6-pack, which will cover the next 6 weeks of wine school. So we'll make sure, that'll all come pretty soon here, and you guys can follow along. So Grant and I, by the way, and the reason we're doing this, wrote a book called How to Drink Wine. It is right here. It comes out really soon, May 12th. It is a whole book, actually a complete book, even though it doesn't look like one now. And we cover all the stuff we talk about here with great illustrations. So that's coming out May 12th. It is available anywhere books are sold. So please pick it up. We're super excited about it, but also grateful that you guys are all here with us. Do we have the chat working? Has everybody got the worksheet? Let us know if not. Maybe somebody can drop it in the Q&A if the chat's not working, just to make sure it's there. And if you don't have it or you haven't seen it yet, we always do a worksheet for these courses or classes so you can kind of follow along. And then we put like recommended producers and stuff in there so that you can hopefully refer back to it, which is always useful. So that being said, today we're talking about Tuscany and about Chianti and drinking some Chianti. So Grant, you want to kick off and talk about the wine that hopefully we all have with us now?
You got it.
I have to hold things in front of my face because Zoom has this weird disappearing trick thing that's strange, but there it is.
You got no arms.
I have no arms.
Well, that's what happened to me too. You just can't.
Just vanish. All right, so what are we drinking? Hopefully you're all drinking this, but let's talk about it.
Sweet. So this is, I would say, one of my favorite red wines from Italy. It's like a great producer and great value and just really refreshing to drink across the board. And it's from Chianti, right? Which you've all probably heard of, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But this is from a producer named Monte Raponi. Monte Raponi is the name of this really small part of a hill, and a couple that were from Florence bought this old estate that had all these amazing vineyards on it. And over the last like 10, 15 years or so, they've started making what I think are some of the best versions of Chianti Classico. So we'll talk about the difference between Chianti and Chianti Classico, but this is Monte Raponi Chianti Classico, so from Tuscany, and it is 95%, let me check it out, 95% Sangiovese, and then there's a little bit of another grape in here called Caniolo, which is really not that important for you to know. But the reason I like this producer a lot is I think you hear like words thrown around, old school or rustic or traditional in winemaking a lot, which unless you're really studying like winemaking techniques and the differences between old oak barrels and new oak barrels and things like that don't really mean all that much. But I think this wine definitely has is made in what would be like a traditional sort of sense, and also definitely tastes like it too. And so what that really means is that it's the difference between something being really like fruity and really juicy and jammy versus something being more savory and kind of earthier and funkier just naturally, right? And so that this I think is a great example of that, because the wine, it's not a light wine necessarily, but it's also, even when you look at it in color, it's not really dark and jammy, and you don't smell the oak characteristics, which are kind of like vanilla and chocolatey, right? For me, this is like much more kind of leathery and smells like spices. And when you taste it, it's a little bit more tart rather than being kind of sweet and juicy. You get that, Chris?
Yeah, it's sort of like it's like it's very different, but in ways I guess sort of similar to the Rioja thing, where you don't taste as much of that like oak, right? But it's a great wine. I love it. I love Sangiovese generally, but specifically some of these Chianti Classicos are just like the best, especially with pasta and anytime you're eating Italian food.
So with this though, so the thing, right? Everybody has definitely heard of Chianti, who's of the drinking age, I think, at this point. And what happened is Chianti became like the Italian wine. It was served all over the place, and with that, I think a lot of like its brand and potential for being a really good wine was sort of lost. People are like, oh yeah, it's just like a wine, right? You would never really take it that seriously.
Yeah, the wicker bottle on the red checker tablecloth at the Italian.
Totally. This girl I had a crush on in college crushed Carlo Rossi all the time. We don't talk about
that's the beginning of the story as to why you got into wine.
Exactly. But the thing with it though is that there's like a shit ton of Chianti made, and Chianti is, if you think of it, it's kind of like I don't want to say what's the best version of it, but I don't know LA all that well, but it's probably like somebody from
I don't know where you're going, but it's bad.
I was about to make a joke about New York, and I can't do that right now. But it's kind of like, all right, I'll make a joke of myself. So when I lived in Italy, I used to say I'm from New York, which I am. But everybody would think like, oh, you're from New York City. And I was like, yeah, but I didn't want to explain that New York was a much larger place than the wonderful New York City where I'm at today, right? And so that's the same thing with Chianti, is that you can say like Chianti, and then there's also a small part of it that is like the true Chianti, and that's called Chianti Classico. And what happened is there was like a bunch of people like, oh shit, everybody wants to drink Chianti, let's try to make more of it, right? And land, obviously, you can't like expand, but you can grow grapes wherever, and if you call it by the name of a place, then people just assume that's where it's from and that's what it tastes like. And that's what happens. So if you see Chianti on a label, right, that means it can kind of be from like a really large region. It's usually it's always like the least expensive, but it's kind of a crapshoot as to how it's going to taste, because there's not as many laws that you have in Chianti Classico about what you can put into it. So Chianti, like Carlo Rossi, Wicker Basket, that's probably not all about Sangiovese, and they put a bunch of other grapes in there to make it fruitier and just kind of easier to drink and a little bit sweeter, right? And then there's Chianti Classico, which is a really beautiful, where you're hanging out, stretch of land that historically is where all the grape vineyards were, and where all, kind of the tradition of Chianti Classico started. There you go.
Boom. I'll pull up a map.
Florence and Siena. And so it's kind of that, like, it's sort of right down in between Florence and Siena. is what we're talking about. So when you see Chianti Classico on a label, the grapes are grown in arguably the best part for Sangiovese within the larger Chianti, right?
Hold on. Can you see the label now? Because I want to pull up the wine label that we're drinking. You guys
There
see
we
that?
go. So Monte
Cool.
Raponi, Chianti Classico, and then one little thing, if you really want to go deep, Rada in Chianti. Rada's definitely my favorite town for Chianti. It's a tiny little village with just, I don't know, I think like 3 or 4 producers that all make spectacular wine.
You can see that Rada and Chianti, almost like the very bottom of the label, right above the website.
You saw another town on the map called Panzano, and that's like, if you really want to go get your pasta and pork ragu on, that's where the butcher Dario Cecchini is. I think he was on like a big Netflix special. But that's like Chianti tourism zone. It's a really, really beautiful place, and there's good wine there too. All right, so we're in Chianti Classico, and this wine in particular, like I said earlier, is 95% Sangiovese.
Oh, hold on. I'm going to show you the section of the bottle. Hold on. I got the back. Here you go.
It's important to note that because Sangiovese has now, I would say only until recently, are people excited about Sangiovese as like a standalone grape because it's such a lighter wine and it's also kind of tart. But our like collective tastes have gone more towards drinking wines that are more refreshing, have more acidity to it, and are just like lighter and lower in alcohol. So before, there was a bunch of like wine law that was created to where you were allowed to put really any grape still today. And there's some pretty good versions of Chianti Classico to where you can put like Cabernet, or you can put Syrah, or you can put some of these international grapes that really boost the alcohol up and make the wines kind of bigger and juicier. But if you see a wine that's 100% Sangiovese or 95% Sangiovese, I would say it's more in this style that ultimately, like, this is kind of a light to medium bodied wine.
Yeah,
Right?
13.5% alcohol, so certainly not like a big boy.
So, word.
You want that back up?
No, we're good. We're good. We got the Chianti and Chianti Classico thing. So look out for Chianti Classico.
And really, really quick, because there was a question about it. Let's just talk a little bit about this wine exactly. So, which you were mentioning, right? Like it's lighter, it's a little fresher. That's certainly sort of the sign of the times and why this stuff is becoming more popular. But I think like, what about like, other than quality, like how do you taste the quality difference in like a Chianti Classico versus maybe something more broad, like just Chianti that you might see?
Yeah, quality is tough, right? But because, I don't know, people say that it's subjective, but I don't really think it is. And that for me, like quality in wine is how it's made and how it tastes different, right? So Chianti Classico has the potential to just have like different and more complex flavors, versus Chianti is going to be much simpler in taste. So rather than here where you get some of those kind of like earthy, sort of funky characteristics to it, in Chianti you'll get like much just cleaner berries, kind of fruity, like really simple flavors, and it won't have like, literally just won't taste as, just as like deep and kind of different as this would. So it's hard though, because who's to say exactly like what tastes better than another? But arguably, if a wine,
are for sure.
We are definitely, but if a wine, I just think if the wine like has the potential to have unique and I think like pronounced characteristics to it, then that's, from a better site versus something else that is just like fruit. And that's what happens with like, simpler wines or wines that are grown in, sometimes you might be like driving down, or if you're ever in quote unquote wine country in California, it can be really beautiful, but then there's a whole section of California that's just like flat fields where they grow grapes, and those grapes just don't taste as interesting as grapes grown in a different place. And Chianti's like that. So that's important. We wrote a little bit about it, is that in Chianti, you see like Chris is on top of the vineyard. And then, there's some like olive trees, there's some cypress trees, there's a bunch of other stuff going on. And
By
what
the
you
way, this whole one hurt me so bad because I'm like grabbing screenshot, finding the backgrounds and realizing that I don't know when anyone's going to be able to go on trips like this. And it's just been painful, really hard to like look at this.
That's why you just got to throw up the Mona Lisa.
That's right. That's right. The David.
But the thing that used to happen is like people would have they'd have their big ass house in the background, and then everything was a farm, right? And it was a farm for themselves. So they'd have vineyards, and they would have gardens, and they'd plant some olive trees, and then they keep like the forest going on over there. So the wild boars and whatever would hang out, and they could get shot and eaten for your pasta sauce. And then there's like a lot of diversity in this area as to what they can grow. But yeah, Chianti Classico is the spot, and I'm not sure if there's any other questions specific about this producer, but Montalcino, a small producer, all organic, doing all the right things.
And reasonably priced. What's the price on this one generally? I can't even remember, but like
it's like 28 to $30.
Yeah, I love these wines because they're actually like, for what you get, I think it's a really good value almost always.
Definitely. They make a couple different like single vineyards, which get up a little bit more in price, but this like their Chianti Classico is my go-to. Super good.
Cool.
So Sangiovese, it's a light, tart, kind of earthy wine when it's all by itself, but you might see Chianti Classico that has some other stuff in it that'll just make it a little bit bigger and richer if that's what you're looking for.
So let's talk a little bit more about the area generally, and then I think there's some questions about the difference between what we're drinking now and a Brunello, which we'll get to. But I think it's worth. I mean, so many people have been to this part of the world, right? And I think probably more so than Burgundy or Bordeaux or something like that. Like people go to Rome, people go to Florence, people cruise through Tuscany, and so a lot of people have been to this part of the world and are familiar with it. But I think that's also what's interesting about it is you can sort of put yourself in that place as you think about like, oh, great, Montalcino's over here. Here's why that's different. So let's talk a little bit about like altitude and all the stuff that's on the worksheet because I think it's super relevant, obviously.
Yeah. So, right, Tuscany is on the coast of the Mediterranean, and then kind of as you like go inland, there's a run of mountains that go north to south pretty much in Italy. And those are all the like beautiful hills with places like that we really want to be right now. And they stretch, the like hills kind of stretch down, and they even end up just north of Rome in Umbria. And then they'll go further down into Naples, and kind of like Italy is sort of just divided by this mountain range that goes north and south. And then the coast kind of fall on either side of it. And so Chianti is really like, I would say it's, pretty far inland, all things considered, but the way that the mountains happen to go is that it's higher in elevation. And also the hills are like more compact. So you can even see like there's sun shining on this part of the hill. There's no sun on that other part of the hill. Right.
Bob around while you talk about it.
Exactly. And so what that means is, especially in these areas that are higher in elevation, so where it's naturally cooler, the aspect where the vineyards are is really important as to how they'll taste, right? Because like on the not so sunny side, things just aren't going to get that ripe or be able to grow at all. And that's why they would leave it as like the forest. Whereas on the sunny side, that's where things get ripe and they build up enough sugar to turn into alcohol. Or if they get too ripe, they turn into a lot of alcohol, and that's when things get kind of fruity. So the big difference is that Chianti it's pretty high in elevation, and because it's so mountainous, there's a lot of sort of choice as far as where people will plant vineyards in order to get the best ripeness, which turns into alcohol, which turns into kind of the fruitiness of a wine for the wine, therefore then to just how it tastes at the end of the day.
Jeff was asking about the Montalcino. Where is it pretty high up, or is it
super high? So Rada and Chianti is the highest town up. And so I think this is like, we chose this because often people will associate Chianti as not having like too much characteristic or kind of being simple and just not that interesting. But I think in part because of the winemaker, but also in part because of the location of Rada, this wine has amazing potential. And arguably, his neighbor is a producer called Montevertine. I'll type that in there. That make
first one on the worksheet.
It's on the worksheet too. They make Pergola Torte. They make they're probably my top 3 producers in all of Italy. Like historically, the wines get pretty expensive, etc. But they're really, really amazing, and that's kind of the best town for Chianti Classico, is in Rada. Well, let's go down to Montalcino because I think it's important, and that's another area that we definitely associate with Italian wine here in our lovely country and state, and the state.
If you have not been to Montalcino, that is a place you should go to as soon as you can. It's basically the top of the hill that overlooks all of this whole area, and it's this old town, very top of the hill. It's amazing.
It's super, super nice. And yeah, so Montalcino's further south, and it gets a little bit lower in altitude, and also the hills kind of spread out, right? So there's less of these like peaks and valleys, and they're more like concentrated, and they kind of come into fields. So the temperature is warmer. And also the soil is different down there. Up here, which is just a little bit of a kind of a general statement, is that soil, which is really wet and really fertile and really rich, versus soil that is really dry, right? We don't really like think that much about soil unless you're growing things on it. Is the wines can taste really different. And so Montalcino, it doesn't have like ultra rich soils, but there's more clay in it, so the soils are a little bit more wet, and they produce wines that have more ripeness to it and tend to have therefore a little bit more alcohol, and also.
And when you're saying more, you're saying richest in body, sorry, but you're saying more than like a Chianti Classico.
More than a Chianti Classico. Yeah, exactly. So if we were to have like this same producer make a wine in Montalcino, right, it'd probably be a little bit darker in color, and when you tasted it, it would feel just kind of like denser and more full in flavor, but it would have similar aromatics and similar characteristics to it because it is the same grape, but it'll just be a little bit bigger of a wine based on the fact that it's warmer and based on the fact that the soils down there are different and allow the grapes to get kind of bigger and juicier. So Montalcino, again, another wine that like I think really blew up. It became, a bit of a status symbol and Italian American pride.
You mean Brunello?
Brunello. Yeah. Brunello di Montalcino. Sorry if I say Chianti again.
No, I think sometimes we just refer to Montalcino, but there's, I think people definitely know Brunello.
Brunello, yeah. So Brunello di Montalcino, it's the same grape. The grapes look a little bit different. It's just a different clone, but it's the same grape. In Brunello, you're legally, or in Montalcino, if the wine says Brunello di Montalcino, you're legally not allowed to put anything else in there, which is an important fact. There was like a little bit of a scandal because the wines got really popular. Robert Parker, a really important wine critic back in the day that had a sweet tooth and loved like really high alcohol, really oaky, juicy wines, really fell in love with Brunello. And producers were like, shit, I want to make a wine that Parker would like. So they started to make wines that were really big, really dark in color, really juicy. Whereas you can see that Sangiovese isn't really that grape. So they started putting in a bunch of other like international grapes down there, and they got in some trouble with the wine cops and call it a day.
Yeah, and remember, even the Monterpone isn't 100% Sangiovese. There's a little bit of, some other stuff in there too. So
exactly.
That's
but
that's wants to know.
It's 100%, and the wines are, they're just bigger. And with that, because they're a little bit bigger, they have some laws. They have it a little bit in Chianti. You'll see like Chianti Classico Reserva, but it's really not that big of a deal. They have some laws down there around how long the wines must age in order for it to be Brunello or Rosso di Montalcino. And so If it is Brunello, it must be aged for 4 years plus. And then if it's Rosso, which is often still the same grapes grown from the same area, it's not aged as long, and often a producer will use like younger vines or vineyard sites that aren't as like premier in order to make a Rosso, which is lighter in flavor, it's fruitier in flavor because it's not aged as long. It's also less expensive, and it's easier to drink when it's young.
So just to back up, because you'll see this a lot.
Yeah.
There's Brunello di Montalcino, and then there's Rosso di Montalcino, and the differences are what Grant just described. But often you'll find both wines from the same producer.
Exactly.
And so, and the Rossos can be great wines, but sometimes significantly cheaper for all the reasons Grant just mentioned. But like I'll often look for a Rosso on a wine list when I don't want to spend a ton of money, but when I want to drink something great, especially if you can recognize a producer.
Rosso tastes a lot more like Chianti than Brunello would per se. Chianti only needs to, Chianti Classico only really needs to age like a couple of years before it's released, and Rosso is the same. So if you see Rosso di Montalcino and you're looking for a big wine, it's not going to really deliver. Brunello will, and it'll be significantly different in taste. But Rossos are great, and I think more and more you're seeing, because Brunello is still, the wine, it's really hard to find like a great Brunello for more than 60, 70 bucks because the producer has to hang on to the wine for that long. You're not getting paid for 5 years on the thing that you make. So the wines definitely trade up, and Rosso is a great way to grab something from this area if you want to check out a different version of Sangiovese.
Like cheap Brunello isn't really a thing.
You don't want that.
It's like cheap Barolo.
It's hard, man. It's like, that's the thing, is there's definitely some wines, and that's our next section here, that are expensive just because of brand, right? They're like, they're expensive because people will pay that much.
Yeah, exactly.
Not expensive because there's like limitations on the grapes. There's even limitations in these areas as to the total amount of grapes that a farmer can get off a specific amount of land, right? And they do that so that people don't get greedy and all of a sudden like grow way too many grapes, and then which also like in turn diminishes the flavor. So they put all these regulations in place in order to protect like the collective brand of Chianti Classico or the collective brand of Brunello di Montalcino. So that's why when we say like they're not allowed to do things, they do that so that, if you have a Brunello and you don't know the producer, you have some expectation of what it's going to taste like, and hopefully you enjoy that experience, and then it lifts up the other producers, and there's a kind of a communal taste and quality that is controlled by some of these wine laws.
We've got a couple of questions from people asking about the Vino Nobile di Montepulciano and how that fits into this whole equation.
Yeah, I kind of ignored that one just because it's tough right now. So there's not that many like great producers. You definitely see it. It's sort of was considered like the third region of Tuscany. The grape's also Sangiovese. It's really similar to Chianti. One good producer is called Poliziano. They make really pretty good wine, but it's still Sangiovese. You see less and less of it nowadays. It's really not that great of an area. I think the reason it was so successful was that it had a good name, even though it was long, and also Montepulciano Montepulciano is another grape in Italy. You see Montepulciano di Abruzzo, which is a grape we wrote about in the book because I think it's pretty common. You see it around, and it's kind of like Italy's like big wine from southern Italy.
And those are the two big towns that people visit, both Montalcino and Montepulciano, which aren't too far apart. You can hit both of them in a day if you wanted to, but
definitely beautiful place. It's great, but I'm excited to try some producers that are doing really good things there. So if anybody has any recommendations,
recommend them to us if you got them for sure. Looks like we got a couple.
We are open-minded. sort of.
Um,
But yeah, that's good. When we were writing this out, I was like, should we include that? But it's really it's not as important. I think the three main red wines. There's a little bit of white wine and some sweet wine in Tuscany too, but the three main red wines that we're really talking about and that I think you'll see most often are Chianti Classico, Montalcino, Rosso, more so now, and Brunello is all over the place. And then our next wine, wait for it.
switch it up. There it is.
Switching it up, changing the vibe. That's Pauly D throwing some cards.
Pauly G, is it D? D, yeah, Pauly D. Pauly G's the pizza guy.
Pauly G,
Basically the same guy, just different age.
Exactly. Is a super Tuscan. And a super Tuscan is definitely an easy wine for people to relate to, but it's a really difficult wine to talk about or to explain, because super Tuscan is just a term that was made up by some journalists who were likely getting paid on the side, or were just, you know what, they did a really good job, and they coined it as the term to describe wines from Tuscany that were made from international grapes or in areas that didn't have like regions that could describe them, such as Chianti Classico or Brunello di Montalcino, right? And so what happened is, along the Tuscan coast, there's this area, it's called Bulgari. It's really beautiful, actually, is that there were, and still today, very, very much so, so people decided that they were going to plant grapes like Cabernet, grapes like Merlot, even Syrah, and make wines that were mostly from those grapes in the style of Bordeaux, a little bit in the style of California, but mostly in the style of Bordeaux, because they really started doing this in the 60s and 70s. So Chianti Classico, Brunello di Montalcino, those are wines that have existed for hundreds and hundreds of years, and grown in those areas, whereas these areas were very newly planted to these grapes. And come around like the 80s and 90s, the wines really blew up. People are like, I want a super Tuscan. And we still hear it today, a little bit less so, as we've all have more access to wine than people did a while ago, and are just more curious. But I think it's an important thing for people to know. So super Tuscan is just a term. Doesn't mean anything or point you in any sort of direction as far as what the grape is.
But it'll probably get you what you want if you say it in a wine shop or in a restaurant. People know what you're looking for.
They definitely know what you're looking for. And if somebody is like, a sommelier is like, well, what do you mean by that? They're just being an asshole, and it's because they like read something in preparation for an exam, and we're like, well, a super Tuscan technically can be anything. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for a super Tuscan, what you want is a wine that kind of tastes like California Cabernet, or like Bordeaux. So wines that are darker, they're richer in flavor, they're oakier, they're higher in alcohol, they're juicier, they're bigger wines. And that's what a super Tuscan ultimately is. There's a little bit of
friends that go from like, I only drink cab, to then they're like, I drink some cab and some super Tuscans. And there's sort of like the evolution.
I can't, like, sometimes people will be like, hey, we want you to like come check out my wine cellar. Which is awesome. I'm like, cool, you're doing all right. Like, you have a wine cellar. That's a nice thing to say you have. And I'm like, okay, cool. And like 95% of wine cellars that we go to they're loaded up with California Cabernet, and they're like, yeah, and I'm really getting into Tuscan wine. And that's like kind of the difference, which is cool, because that, I think, starts and gets people's interested. If you're starting with Cabernet and then they're starting to like kind of branch out into wines that taste a little bit different, and maybe that will lead them to Barolo eventually, which will then maybe lead you to Burgundy, and then you sort of have it all figured out. But Super Tuscans ultimately are like more similar, I would say, to wines from California, like Super Tuscans as you know it, than wines from like the classic Tuscan regions.
I feel like
So
also like these are wines that a lot of people know by a couple key producers, even maybe than they know what the actual
exactly.
stuff is.
So that like we wrote down the three, I would say those are the three main wines from Tuscany or from that are Super Tuscans. They're all grown, and once upon a time they were all owned by the same family, the Antinori family.
Which
Who
you
are
probably
like
see a lot of Antinori wines out in the world too.
now there's a ton of Antinori wines out in the world. The Antinori family is a very impressive family, I will say. And they've done like amazing things um, historically. There's like popes in their family and their royalty, and they owned, at one point, like all of the Tuscan coast. And now, still today, they've taken their name and turned it into a wine brand. So if you see Antinori, chances are it's a Super Tuscan. It's kind of bigger and juicier. But Tignanello is a wine that's still under that label. And it is, a blend of Cabernet, and there's a little bit of Sangiovese in it. And I think Tignanello, nowadays it's a little bit different because they were like, cool, this is working. People love Tignanello, aka Tig, Sada, Sinatra. Is we're just gonna make a lot more of it, right? And so they just decided to like make 10 times the amount of Tignanello. So old Tignanello is an amazing wine. It's really, really great. It's really, really well made. Today, Tignanello, totally cool. That's your thing. It's a little bit of a different beast than what it once was, but that's all good. It's still, definitely can be fulfill your need. Ornellaia, another wine. I think up until like the 90s was owned. It was then sold, and they kind of like just decided, instead of making very good wine that got it to this point, we're just gonna make a lot of it. And then Sassicaia, I would say, is the one of like the big brands that still today really is deserving of like the hype and the attention and everything that it gets. It's an amazing like farm. The family still owns it. They haven't grown, Sassicaia to a degree to where it like would diminish any sort of quality. It's definitely not cheap. It's probably like starts around 175 to $200 a bottle. But it is definitely, it can go way up depending on the vintage for sure. It is, yeah, in a restaurant, you never know. It's one of those wines that like in one restaurant you might walk into and it's like $300, and then you walk into like another restaurant that definitely has like a captured clientele, and you're like, weird, the Sassicaia is $1,000.
Yeah.
You're like sitting at the base of Aspen Mountain, and you're like, oh, they don't care, what they're charging for it, because people are just going to drink it.
But it's definitely, look, it's one of those status symbol wines.
Yeah, and I would say it's like, people like love to hate on Dom Perignon, right? Like Veuve Clicquot, and we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks. Veuve Clicquot just sucks. That's just a bad wine. I'm sorry, but like, and it's a big brand, but it's just bad. Dom Perignon is a big brand, and the wine's actually really good, right? And so the two can exist, and Sassicaia, I would say, is one of those.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
Sorry. We're not going to take any ad money from Veuve Clicquot.
That's all right. That's all right. Well,
I promise.
There's other people out there that want to spend. Yeah, look, I think so those are the big sort of topics, basically ranging through this area that we wanted to cover. But there's a lot of other stuff. I think in the chat, there's a few things we want to circle back to. There's a lot of questions I think I saw a couple questions about the Chianti Classico Reserva, because you see that on labels a lot. And I think there's some curiosity there, which obviously relates to aging. But do you want to talk a little bit about that just to cover those questions?
Yeah, so Chianti Classico Reserva, what you'll see producers do, and this is a little bit of what we were talking about in Montalcino too. So when a Reserva happens, it means that, and this is the rule in like Barolo, yeah, all over where you see Reserva. Reserva really means that the wine is aged for a little bit longer of time, and it's usually like their best selection of grapes. And best for a producer is the grapes that are, I would say, probably have like in this area have the most flavor and the most concentration of flavor. So Reservas tend to be a little bit bigger, and because they're aged longer, they tend to be a little bit more kind of like drier and tannic in a way. So Reserva is, yeah, it's something that you have to throw on a label. It's a producer's choice as to what grapes they put in there, but they would be silly not to put their best grapes in there. So it's probably their better selection of fruit, and then it's aged for another year. So the wines just get a little bit denser and a little bit heavier.
Somebody asked about, as because we were talking obviously about Antinori, somebody asked about Caste Labonte, which I think you actually do see a lot of in Tuscany as well. Make a lot of wine, but probably
Like
not.
Walmart. That shit, like Bonfi is everywhere. I'm sorry. It's all over the place. When you're driving around, you just see Bonfi, Bonfi, Bonfi. And they put a bunch of junk into the wines. The wines are tough. But you see it a lot. Try to look out, like you can find producers that are the same price that are doing different things. It's a tough wine though. That's like they're sort of they're yeah. I don't know. Are we allowed to say that?
Yeah, you can say that. But that's actually then at least I think if we're gonna say that, because there are some questions about what are some then like cool discoveries that maybe don't fit into all of these, kind of old world winemaking. Is there sort of like a natural wine thing happening here? Are there people experimenting that people should check out?
Yeah, I think both and that's like this producer's that is an example of that, and there's some cool stuff going on in Montalcino too. I would say all the producers that we wrote down for Chianti and Montalcino are all like younger producers that are a little bit more like natural wine focused, without the wines being like really funky per se. But part of the reason what's wrong with Bonfi is that it's just like they're not, it's the difference between making like wine as like a grocery or making something that is like a craft, right? And that's not to say that like everything needs to be like precious and manicured, but it's just the attention. If somebody's saying, listen, I just want to make wine just to make wine, it's a whole different experience. It's like a chef, right? The same thing, a whole different experiences. Even if the chef is making just a roast chicken, if they're like, I want to make the best damn roast chicken ever, right? You want that chicken versus something else where somebody's just like doesn't care and they're throwing it out the window. And so there are producers, that's where producer becomes really important. And not to plug the book, but I think it'll be a really useful piece of information. It's hard to understand producers nowadays, unless you're like, I don't know, there's a few people on Instagram to follow who are sommeliers and have like really good taste, and the producers they throw up, even I'm like, oh cool, I'm probably going to check that out, right? Because they're not like, I don't know, they're not getting paid by like certain producers to throw things up and talk about it, whatever. But in Chianti, people like this, and a handful of other producers, and also Montalcino, there's definitely like a movement of the next generation who is like, this is actually a really good area. Let's try to make better wine here, and do it right, so to speak. So part of the reason why we really want to talk about it is because it is an area that, although is like a huge brand name and we all know about it, I would say today there's really exciting stuff going on here. And like, I didn't know about this producer until 3 years ago or so, when, we tried it randomly. Somebody came by Charlie Brown, and I was like, damn, that's a really good wine. And then went there, visited. I was like, wow, these guys are really serious. They're doing it right. And now, there's a whole sort of movement of the next generation of these old traditional places. But there's no like Jura equivalent kind of cool zone going on there.
But it is, I think that what's cool about it though, because there's a couple questions about this too, but it is a place that, a lot of people visit, but I think, at least in my experience, a lot of people, when they visit, if they do go to wineries, they tend to go to like these like massive places that have a hotel on the property, and they're probably making like pretty bad wine. But there's a lot of cool stuff to discover, even if you just go to some of these towns and drink the wines in the restaurants and talk to the people in the restaurants and sort of get a piece of the culture. I think it sort of adds to the experience. Somebody was actually asking like great vineyards closest to Florence.
It's great. Chianti's super close, and there's a couple cool, like right, that you can like stay in Florence, and pretty much as soon as you drive out of Florence, you're in Chianti. You kind of pop right into it, and so there's definitely some stuff there.
So let's hit two more questions. One that is actually twice has been asked, which is, why is there that black rooster on the bottles of Chianti Classico?
The Gallina. That is the sign of the Chianti Classico collective. And if you're in Tuscany, you might eat some weird birds like a rooster. They love that shit. Or pigeon. I remember I was a foreign exchange student in Italy, which means like I was the awkward kid in I don't know, we had some really awkward foreign exchange students in high school. And I remember I was like up in northern Italy, and we went on like a class trip to Chianti actually. And I was like 16 and grew up in a town that definitely didn't serve anything other than like turkey and chicken. And I remember my teacher ordered the pigeon, and I was like, fuck, this guy is a savage. He's eating a pigeon right now. But pigeon and the Gallina in Tuscany are great things. You might find yourself eating some of those if you head over there.
And by the way, if I've been to Italy with Grant and did not know until we got there that the man is fluent in Italian, which was both very useful but also quite shocking when I all of a sudden heard him just like ripping perfect Italian as we talk to people around the country. But and then the last question, which I thought is just awesome and funny, which is, where did you guys go to college, and did you study wine/grapes? We actually both went to Colorado. College is in Colorado. I went to Colorado State. Grant went to CU. I studied Bud Light mostly in college and got to the grapes much later. But Grant,
this on the side.
There you go. Grant worked in restaurants, some great restaurants in Boulder specifically, and that's where the whole journey started. But this was great.
Yeah. Oh, we ran out of time. We're almost done.
You're about to tell a great story. Come on, let's hear it.
No, I was just saying, wine's one of those things that really, like, through this is how I first got into it, was going to like wine school at the restaurant that I was working at. And I was like, oh, cool, this is actually interesting to learn about. And there's, a whole element that's like geography and history and of course the taste of it. So I'm a terrible student, and it's something that you don't necessarily have to like take a course or definitely don't have to go to college for in order to learn.
I even saw Cedric answer a question somebody had asked and just said, look, you drink a lot of wine, and that's definitely a part of it. But, studying and learning this stuff is important too. So hopefully this has at least piqued some interest for people. And, I think there's a couple last questions here about, where you can find these recordings after the fact. So we're going to put all this in one place. We're working on it now just so we can host everything in the right place. But if you want to email us, we can get you sorted out. Just email us at wine@theinfatuation.com. I think somebody had said they missed the beginning of it. We're going to try to make them more accessible on demand so that if you didn't catch it live, you can catch it after the fact. But yeah, if we didn't get to one of your questions, please just shoot us an email at that email address, wine@theinfatuation.com. Again, thank you to Cedric, our friend from 11 Madison Park, who's been great answering questions and helping us out on this. And one last thing, just I think we've mentioned this a few times, but we've been throughout all of this just trying to keep raising money to support various causes around the restaurant community. We've been doing a bunch with World Central Kitchen, which has been great, and we've I think now started creeping on another goal of $20,000 raised. And we're also, I'm going to drop this in the chat, but we're also supporting the James Beard Foundation's efforts right now. So there's a lot obviously going on, and we all want to be able to help in as many ways as possible. So anything you can contribute, helps, and we're all just trying to sort of be supportive through all of this. So again, thank you guys so much for joining us for this. We'll be back with another one next week. I think next week we're going to do a little side-by-side between Chablis and California Chardonnay, which should be fun. And those wines are on parcel.com. There's the Moro, Naudet, Chablis, and then I think, what's the California Chardonnay that we're doing?
Enfield.
Yeah. So you can find those on parcel.com. I think there's actually a wine school area of parcel.com. If you didn't catch the email, we'll be announcing the next 6-pack, which then will give us sort of be set up for the next 6 weeks of classes. That'll be happening really, really soon. And then we're doing a special one on May 12th, which is 2 weeks from today, which is the day our book comes out. We're going to hit Champagne and have some fun. So please be there for all of that. Thank you guys so, so much. Have a great rest of your evening, and we will see you soon. Bye.
Bye, guys.